Welcome everybody to Tropical Weather Update. It is about 6 p.m. when I'm recording this video on September 24, 2022. This is an update specific to Tropical Storm Ian located in the central Caribbean Sea. Let's start out though, before we get into that, look at the 5-day tropical weather outlook. Ian, as you can see, is down here. Let's just quickly look at some of the other tropical activity before we get into Ian, which is the most important of any of these storms. Fiona is a post-tropical cyclone, and that is actually affecting Newfoundland and possibly Greenland at some point. So let's take a look at that. You can see it's forecast by Tuesday to be close to Greenland as a tropical storm. So that's very unique. I'm pretty sure that that is not something that happens very often. Hurricane warnings are in effect for parts of Newfoundland right now. Let's go back to the tropical weather outlook. Gaston is moving to the west, but it's so far north already that it's not going to go all the way west to the United States. Hermine is moving north at 9, so that is really no threat to anyone. And this disturbance only has a 30% chance of formation. So really the focus is on Tropical Storm Ian, which right now only has pressure of 1,003 millibars and about 45 mile-an-hour winds. Let's take a look at it on a satellite map here. Sorry about that. It's starting to look a little bit more impressive. Some nice outflow all around the storm. And it's moving into an area that is extremely conducive for rapid intensification, according to the National Hurricane Center. And that's why they're very concerned about this storm. This storm is going to make it into the Gulf of Mexico and become potentially a Category 4 or even 5 hurricane. So let's look at that. This is the intensity guidance, and you can see at around the 60 to 72 hour mark from now is when it's expected to peak out in intensity, which the good news is the peak is expected to occur well before landfall, and then some gradual decrease in strength should occur before landfall. But the storm will make landfall somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, either from Tampa, Florida, all the way to potentially Houston, Texas. That is my forecast at this point. Right now, the National Hurricane Center's forecast has it going more toward the Florida west coast. But these models that we're going to be looking at are shifting and trending to the west. They're trending to the left, meaning earlier today they had it hitting almost South Florida or Tampa, Florida, and now that's no longer the case. It continues to move to the left. And I'm going to show you that on a map and then show you what the current tropical and hurricane models are showing. So let's go right now, though, to the official National Hurricane Center forecast, which has it currently staying off the Florida coast and hitting somewhere in the Florida Big Bend area, somewhere between Apalachicola and Tampa. But let me show you what I mean by the models trending. This exact same forecast at 8 a.m. this morning had it coming directly through the Tampa Bay area. Okay, by 2 p.m. it had it going north of the Tampa Bay area. And now by 5 p.m. it has it well off Tampa Bay and heading toward the Big Bend area of Florida, like the Cedar Key area. So you can see the trend in the models is to the west or to the left. And I'm going to show you some other models which indicate that it's even going to go further west of there, more toward Pensacola, Florida, and less likely what you're seeing on this National Hurricane Center map. So let's go back here. We've already looked at the satellite photo. This is a map of the wind shear, deep layer wind shear. And if it's green, it's more likely for favorable conditions in the upper atmosphere and in the shear for development of this hurricane. And if you look on here, the entire Gulf of Mexico, all of this area is very favorable until you get close to the Gulf Coast. So it's moving into an area that's extremely conducive for development in the next 4 or 5 days. The red is the higher levels of shear, and this storm is not going to encounter any unfavorable vertical shear until it gets very close to making landfall, which should help reduce the strength from Category 5 or 4 to maybe a 3 or 2 before it makes landfall. That's at least the hope here. You can't rule out anything at this point, and these forecasts are subject to change because it's not until Thursday or so when this storm is expected to be very close to making landfall somewhere in the Gulf Coast of the United States. So now let's see, what can we look at next? Let's look at the model tracks. These are the official hurricane tracks, all sorts of different spaghetti models, as they call them, from tropicaltidbits.com, who maps them out. I give credit to tropicaltidbits.com in the comments or in the description of this video. Levi Cowan says you can use these as long as you give credit to them. And you can see the center of all these is closer to the Tallahassee, Apalachicola area, and not the center of this is not where the National Hurricane Center forecast is, which is further to the right. The Jeff's ensembles are even further to the west, and you can see this brings it much closer to Pensacola and as far west as Louisiana, like Port Charles, Louisiana. So to me, these models are all shifting to the west. So I think if you're in South Florida, you can breathe some sigh of relief at this point, because yesterday, I think people in South Florida, especially Southwest Florida, Fort Myers, Tampa, thought they are under the gun. They're going to get hit by an extremely powerful hurricane. Now I think if you're anywhere from maybe Houston, Texas, all the way to Apalachicola, Florida, you need to be more concerned about this storm being a Gulf of Mexico event, a Gulf Coast storm, where storm surge is much worse than in southern Florida. So even if the storm does weaken from a 5 or 4 when it hits peak sometime next week, it will still drive a massive amount of Gulf water into and to the right of wherever it makes landfall because of the counterclockwise circulation. And some of these areas, especially in Louisiana and Mississippi, are extremely vulnerable to storm surge. So obviously if it maintains a track to the east of them, that's okay from a storm surge standpoint, because the winds then would be coming offshore and not blowing onshore. But if the track continues the trends that we're seeing and it continues to track more to the west, then Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle need to be very concerned with the storm surge here. I think the Florida Panhandle, no matter what, is going to get hit here. Whether it goes west or east, they're going to be on one side of the storm or the other. But again, if you're on the left side of the storm, the winds are coming offshore. The storm surge potential is not as bad as if you're on the east side of the storm, the right side of the storm, where the counterclockwise circulation over 3 or 4 days in the Gulf of Mexico just keeps pushing water up and north. So let's take a look at the GFS model. And I'm going to go all the way back to here. This is the current. And as it moves, you'll see that it starts to strengthen once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. And actually, they predict, or this model predicts, it gets down to about 927 millibars. I mean, I think that's pretty close to Category 5 strength. So this is Wednesday. I can pretty much assure you there is going to be a monster hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico by next Wednesday. You can see it right here. But then you can see it weakens. I mean, you start to see the pressures rise significantly. 956 millibars, 959, 961, 966, 975 when it gets closer to shore. That's a much better situation than a 920-something millibar hurricane, a few days earlier. So by Friday, the GFS says this hurricane will be close to Pensacola, Florida by next Friday, but much weaker than when it hits its peak on Wednesday or so in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. But again, this is different from the National Hurricane Forecast, which has it more in the Big Bend area of Florida, somewhere around Lake City, or not Lake City, but somewhere in between Apalachicola and Tampa. This model, as well as some of the other models we saw from Tropical Tidbits, has it much further to the west and more of a landfall in the Gulf Coast area of Alabama or Florida. And because the models continue, seems like every 6 hours shifting to the west, when we look at this again tomorrow, it may shift all the way to Biloxi or even to New Orleans. So if the model trend continues. I like to monitor the trend of the models because we're so far out, nothing is written in stone yet. Then if the models then start trending east, then I'll be more concerned about Florida. If they continue to trend west, I'm more concerned about Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and the very western areas of the Florida Panhandle. So anyway, this is something that we really need to keep an eye on because it is going to be a strong hurricane and it's going to hit the United States. That's a certainty. Whether it hits Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, or Florida, that's still up in the air. But it will hit one of those states or multiple states as a relatively strong hurricane, hopefully not a Category 4 or 5 by the time it makes landfall. So please, if you're in any of those areas, keep a very close eye on the storm. I will be doing further updates. I'm sure a lot of people on YouTube will, and your local weather authority should already be telling you about the storm at this point, anywhere from Houston, Texas, all the way to Tampa, Florida. I think if you're in South Florida, the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, you probably can breathe somewhat of a sigh of relief at this point because of the way the models are shifting. But everyone should keep an eye on the storm from Texas all the way to Florida. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with another update. If you are so inclined, please like this video, subscribe to my channel if you wish, and I hope you have a great day, and we'll be back soon. Thank you very much. Bye.